What's up, YouTube? This is Too Raw for TV. All right, so remember this spring? Well, actually, before that, remember I would say since the spring of last year, 2023, into this year, I told you that I was of the impression that Biden would have been in trouble if he had ran for re-election. And remember when I was saying this spring and early summer that if Biden had ran this fall, he would have lost badly. I told you I knew it. It wasn't no speculation on my part. I knew that he would get hammered. And after that debacle of the debate, I knew, and I said in my videos at the time, that he would lose in one of the great landslides in history. And not just him individually. The party would have absolutely been slaughtered in the midterms. Well, not the midterms, excuse me. Down ballot in the congressional races. Well, I saw this. According to an Obama aide, Barack Obama, former speechwriter for Barack Obama, said Joe Biden had internal polling that showed him getting crushed by Donald Trump in the election, and that his vice president would likely face a similar fate. Quote, the Biden campaign's own internal polling at the time, when they were telling us he was the strongest candidate, showed that Donald Trump was going to win at least 400 electoral votes. John Favreau said on the Pod Saves America podcast. That's what their own internal polling was showing at that time. Now, I do remember polls generally at that time giving Joe Biden no more than 42, 43% support. Trump was around 50 or a little bit under it. A lot of people weren't paying attention, but I think had Joe Biden stayed in the race, I think Joe would have probably stayed in the mid-40s. Trump would have went well over 50. And as we all see now, polling tends to underrepresent Donald Trump's core support, and it would have been a bloodbath. I got pretty much what I think would have happened on the screen in this particular video. I think he holds on to California. He holds on to the Pacific Northwest, Oregon, Washington, Hawaii, New York. He stays on as far as keeping it maybe 52, 48, 53, 47. But the rest of the states, just about outside of maybe Maryland and Delaware, would go to Trump. States that haven't voted Republican in a long time, like Minnesota, who even Ronald Reagan lost in 80 and 84, would have went to Trump. It would have been an absolute massacre. Now, look, Kamala Harris was able, and she was pumped up a little bit by media steroids, absolutely, in my opinion. We know the media. Look, there's stats that prove my point. 85% of the media coverage has been very positive for Kamala Harris, okay? There has been evidence of left-leaning media bias going all the way back to FDR. So at the end of the day, that's not something I'm just saying. It's a fact. It's a fact of the fact that, most of the people that work within the media that are involved in journalism tend to be left of center. Not all, but most. But even with that, Kamala Harris still lost. Now, she was able to create some new excitement, bring in some new voters. She energized the base, but she still lost pretty decisively 312, 226 Electoral College. The popular vote is starting to narrow a bit because California votes are still funneling in. I don't know what's up with California, Arizona, Nevada. It takes forever for those people to count their votes. Meanwhile, Florida counted 10 to 11 million votes in a span of 90 minutes. It took them 90 minutes to count over 10 million votes. But Florida, after that debacle in 2000, they cleaned up their act, man. And they have the most efficient counting system in the country. If every other state had the system set up by Florida's counting votes, man, these elections would be over at least by 2, 3 a.m. We wouldn't have to do all this counting. Well, at least by the next day after election day. But anyway, I'm getting a little bit off the point, man. You could see it. Look, have you noticed how much clearer and healthier and more vibrant Joe Biden sounds now? You know what I'm saying? Now that he's in the downward swing of his presidency. The other day when he was talking to media, I hadn't heard Joe Biden sound that strong, that coherent in years, probably since he was vice president. A lot of it has to do with the fact that the pressure is off of him. The rigors of the presidency, even though he's still president, a campaign would have sapped him of his energy. I mean, he was so tired, he even admitted it. In that debate, he could barely stay up. He wanted to nod off. He was slurring over his words. He was saying nonsensical stuff. Imagine him. Look, if he was going to, if Donald Trump was going up against that Joe Biden, he would have won a debate every week, and they would have probably had another debate. And I can't think of Joe Biden being any worse than he was in that June 27th debate. But I tend to think that he would have probably lost another debate. It's not so much that Donald Trump is great in debating. It's just that Joe Biden is so past his prime. His energy is terrible. And, it would have been gaffes galore. Gaffes galore. He didn't have the energy, in my opinion, at age 81, born on 82. I think it's later this month, I think. He would have had the energy to really campaign full time because he's still president. That would have energized Donald Trump. Donald Trump and his team organized a campaign specifically to go against Joe Biden. Specifically. So when Kamala Harris came into the game, it threw them off. It threw them off their gains for several weeks, if not a month. And they still never really got totally on track as far as how to go against her. But if it was Joe Biden, man, I think this would have been one of the biggest landslides ever. I'm not just talking about from a performance of Donald Trump. I'm talking about including the House and the Senate. Look, even with Kamala Harris, even with her bringing in voters that wouldn't have even come out to vote for Joe Biden, I think that, look, in reality, Republicans now have 53 Senate seats. It may, depending upon what goes on in Arizona with that race, Terry Lake is still behind, but she's closing in. They may end up with 54 seats. It's either going to be 53-47 or 54-46. In the House, they're probably going to retain a narrow majority. If this was Joe Biden, Tammy Baldwin goes down. The other one, I can't think of the top of my name off the head, the other ones, but the one in Nevada, the guy who was the Iraqi war veteran who scarred, he narrowly lost by 3,000 votes. If this is Joe Biden, he would easily swept in. I think they would have easily picked up another 4 seats. So we're talking about a 57-58 Republican majority in the Senate. I'm thinking if this was Joe Biden on the ticket, he would have depressed the Democratic turnout so much that, maybe Republicans get 235, 240 House seats. You know what I mean? Um, Individually, Joe Biden probably loses the popular vote by maybe 15 million, at least 15 million. Like I said, Trump probably would have won about 43, 44 states. It would have been absolute sweep out landslide, the biggest Republican landslide since Ronald Reagan in '84. Even though Bush in '88 got 426 electoral votes, many of those states were close, razor thin. This would have been a blowout, total blowout. When you include the House and Senate races and Trump's coattails in this scenario, man, it would have been the biggest landslide when you include the House, Senate, and presidency for Republicans since the 20s. The 20s. But despite all of that, Joe Biden, his selfishness, said that, I'm the best candidate. Even though you had these internal polling showing you getting blown out. So now I kind of understand, even though the Democrats did this themselves, you know what I'm saying, with rigging the primary, schedule and keeping candidates out of the primaries and uh, setting it up so that it was favorable for Joe Biden to win it. Look, for years, we've been saying on social media that Joe Biden was slipping, and the media have been ignoring that, trying to say we're not seeing what we're seeing, even though privately they were seeing it. But they deserve this because they tried to hide an ailing president, a deteriorating president from the American people, a la Woodrow Wilson, with Edith Wilson and his doctor. They conspired to keep that from, they politicized his illness. If you look into that with Woodrow Wilson, he suffered a massive stroke in October of 1919 while he was campaigning for the public sentiment to, be to be approving of the League of Nations, and he suffered a stroke shortly after returning from that trip from what was it? I think he was in Pablo, Colorado, when he had a little small attack. He goes back to Washington and has a major stroke in October of 1919, to the point where he was, for the last few months of his presidency, several months of his presidency, he was an invalid. And the American people didn't even know that because his wife, Edith Wilson, his doctor, whose name I can't recall right now, they hid this information from the public, but they were trying to politicize it. They didn't want Republicans knowing about the extent of Woodrow Wilson's ailment, his and how infirm he was. So they hid it from them, but they hid it from the American people, and they also hid it from the vice president at the time, whose name was, I think his name was William Marshall, who they didn't particularly care for. William Marshall should have became president. Woodrow Wilson should have stepped down, and William Marshall should have became president. But, it is what it is. And to be honest with you, Joe Biden probably should have bowed up this race earlier. And there should have been a competitive Democratic primary campaign. And whoever would have won should have been the nominee, and it would have been legitimate. But to just hand it to Kamala, or just 110 days to compete for the presidency, no matter how you feel about Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, he screwed her over with that. His selfishness and delusions. And, at the end of the day, I feel nothing for them. And that's all I got to say about that one, man. But anyway, it's all for naught. Trump still won. And this is Biden's legacy. No matter how you want to look at it, I tend to look at Biden's presidency as a failure. He was supposed to be this he was supposed to be this caretaker president. Like, what I mean by that is he was the Democratic Party's best option to unseat Trump in 2020, right? So the prevailing wisdom in the Democratic Party was that he wasn't going to run but for one term. But after the midterms, when the supposed red wave that was supposed to happen that year didn't happen, 14 of the 15 Trump endorsed candidates lost, except for J.D. Vance. That was seen as a debacle for Trump, which it was. Joe Biden got a little cocky with himself and said, well, maybe I should run again. Even though we all saw him deteriorating. I mean, it wasn't like he was that great in 2020 to begin with, but we could see the slow and steady decline of Joe Biden over the years. And he ran again selfishly because he was not in position to do so physically. And he hurt his party. And that's right. And right now, that's why he has a 40% approval rating. And that's why the party has turned on him. You know? But anyway, that's all I got to say about that one. Tell me what you got.